Story 1. Cabin Creek Carnage: The Real Massacre. It was a dark and stormy night when I received a mysterious letter in the mail. The envelope was old and worn, the paper inside yellowed with age. As I unfolded the letter, the words written in a shaky hand sent a chill down my spine. The letter spoke of a place called Cabin Creek, a remote area deep in the woods where a gruesome massacre had taken place years ago. 3 friends, once inseparable, had turned on each other in a twisted tale of betrayal that ended in bloodshed. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, I decided to investigate further. I packed my bags and set off for Cabin Creek, the eerie silence of the forest enveloping me as I ventured deeper into the unknown. As I reached the clearing where the cabin stood, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The cabin itself was dilapidated, its windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, the musty smell of decay filling my nostrils. The interior was a scene of chaos and destruction. Furniture lay overturned. Bloodstains splattered across the walls. It was clear that a violent struggle had taken place here, a feud that had spiraled out of control with deadly consequences. I began to piece together the events that had unfolded in this desolate place. 3 friends, once bound by loyalty and camaraderie, had succumbed to jealousy and greed. Betrayal festered in their hearts, turning their once strong bond into a deadly feud. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I discovered the gruesome details of the massacre. One friend had turned on the others, driven by a thirst for power and control. The betrayal had been swift and merciless, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. But the story did not end there. The survivor, the one who had escaped the carnage at Cabin Creek, had vowed to seek justice for the friends he had lost. Consumed by bitterness and rage, he had disappeared into the wilderness, his thirst for revenge unquenched. As I read the final words of the letter, a shiver ran down my spine. The tale of Cabin Creek was a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all, a cautionary tale of the consequences of betrayal and greed. And as I gazed out into the night, the wind whispering through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In the darkness, a figure stood, its eyes burning with a vengeful fire. Anonymous Spectator Story. Story 2. Verdict in the Shadows of Betrayal: Friendship at the Cabin. I never thought a simple weekend getaway with friends could turn into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It all started when my 2 best friends, Mark and Sarah, invited me to their family cabin in the secluded woods. Little did I know that this innocent invitation would lead to a twisted tale of betrayal that would change our lives forever. As we arrived at the cabin, a sense of unease washed over me. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets that I couldn't decipher. Mark and Sarah were in high spirits, laughing and joking as we unpacked our things. But beneath their smiles, I sensed a tension that I couldn't quite place. That night, as we sat around the crackling fire, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Mark and Sarah began to argue, their voices rising in anger. I tried to intervene, but they brushed me off, their eyes filled with a coldness I had never seen before. It was then that I realized I was caught in the middle of a feud that had been brewing between them for years. As the night wore on, their arguments escalated, each accusation more venomous than the last. I felt like a spectator in a twisted play, unable to look away as their friendship crumbled before my eyes. And then, in a moment of madness, everything changed. I watched in horror as Mark lunged at Sarah, his hands wrapped around her throat. I tried to pull him off, but he was too strong, too consumed by rage. And as I watched the life drain from Sarah's eyes, I knew that our friendship was irrevocably shattered. In the days that followed, the police arrived at the cabin, their questions probing into the dark heart of our betrayal. Mark was arrested, his face a mask of defiance as he was led away in handcuffs. And as I stood in the shadow of the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been complicit in the tragedy that had unfolded. The trial was a blur of testimonies and evidence, each detail painting a picture of a friendship torn apart by jealousy and resentment. And as the verdict was read out in the hushed courtroom, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Justice had been served, but the scars of that fateful night would never truly heal. As I look back on that weekend at the cabin, I can't help but wonder what could have been if our friendship had not been tainted by betrayal. But in the end, all I am left with are memories of a friendship lost in the shadows of our darkest impulses. Anonymous Spectator Story. Story 3. Escape from a Real Hell Train Vanishings in Europe. I never thought I would find myself in such a nightmare, trapped in a real-life horror story that seemed to have no end. It all started when my two friends, Mark and Sarah, convinced me to join them on a backpacking trip through Europe. Little did we know that our journey would take a dark and twisted turn, leading us into a deadly feud that would test our friendship to its limits. As we boarded the overnight train from Budapest to Prague, a sense of unease settled over me. The train was old and decrepit, its dimly lit corridors casting long shadows that seemed to dance and twist in the flickering light. The other passengers were few and far between, their faces hidden behind newspapers or turned away in silent contemplation. As the train rattled and groaned its way through the dark countryside, strange things began to happen. Passengers started disappearing one by one, their empty seats the only sign that they had ever been there. Mark, Sarah, and I exchanged nervous glances, our unease growing with each passing moment. I tried to rationalize the disappearances, telling myself that maybe they had simply gotten off at one of the previous stops. But deep down, I knew that something sinister was at play. The air on the train grew thick with fear and paranoia, our minds clouded by the growing sense of dread that surrounded us. As the night wore on, we found ourselves huddled together in our compartment, our hearts pounding in our chests. Every sound, every creak of the train, sent shivers down our spines. And then it happened. Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with malice. We tried to run, to escape the clutches of whatever horror had befallen us, but it was no use. The figure was everywhere, its presence suffocating us, driving us to the brink of madness. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving us shaken and terrified in its wake. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows of the train, we found ourselves alone in the compartment, the other passengers and the mysterious figure nowhere to be seen. We stumbled out onto the platform in Prague, our minds reeling from the horrors we had witnessed. But as we stood there, gasping for breath and trying to make sense of what had happened, a sense of relief washed over us. We were alive, we were together, and we had escaped the clutches of whatever malevolent force had haunted that train. As we made our way into the city, the events of that night slowly faded into memory, becoming nothing more than a twisted tale of betrayal and survival. But deep down, I knew that the horrors we had faced would stay with us forever, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality. Anonymous Spectator Story.